Hi, everybody. My name is Maya. I'm the dietitian at the Cardiac Rehab Clinic, and today I'll be going over nutrition and heart health. I'll be going over what a balanced plate looks like, different eating behaviors, weight. I'll talk also about precision on some nutrients like fats, fiber, sodium, sugar, caffeine, and alcohol. And I'll go over finally over different heart-healthy diets, such as the Mediterranean diet, which you may have heard of. A little caution, there are about 50 slides. I don't want you to memorize everything, but the idea is to maybe have 2 to 3 different habits that you're going to change after this presentation if you're able to. So the balanced plate, what does that look like? Usually well, here I'm basing it on, I took the Canadian Food Guide to showcase what a balanced plate looks like. They recommend a quarter of the plate should be protein. So that's anything animal-based, plant-based as well, lentil, beans, chickpeas, nuts, and seeds. A quarter of the plate should be whole grain. Whole grains also contain a little bit of protein, although not as much as the food items that are shown in the top portion. And half your plate should be fruits and vegetables. So for example, a plate can look like a quarter chicken, it can look like a quarter brown rice, and half of it can be a salad. And that would be considered a balanced plate. That would give you enough protein, enough fiber. Fiber is found in whole grains, fruits and vegetables, as well as plant-based protein. And it would give you enough minerals and vitamins, a diversity of minerals and vitamins. A little activity for you. So you are on an island and you have to pick only one food item. So you don't have any, you have water, you have your medications, you have everything you need, but food, you have to choose only one. So first on the left, you have alfalfa beans, then you have dark chocolate, you have a hot dog with a bun, and you have spinach. And you really have to pick one item that you're going to have access to in order to survive. Which one would you pick? So I'll let you pause the video and reflect on which food item you would pick if you were on that island. And if you haven't paused the video, I will be saying the answer. So the answer is actually a hot dog. And the idea behind it is you're on an island, you need energy. Energy comes from calories when we're talking about food, and the hot dog will give you the most amount of calories in order to survive on the island. If you pick the spinach, for example, you might not survive very long, very little calories. So it is heart healthy, the spinach, and the hot dog would be considered less heart healthy. But the idea here is the context. So we're trying to survive, we're trying to get calories. The hot dog will ensure that we survive the longest and not lose muscle mass as well because of the protein. Overall, this whole activity was to show you that nutrition is very context dependent. If you read something on the internet, there's a lot of information. It might not certainly apply to you. You might need to reflect on your condition, your specific life situation, and what you need at the moment. So right now you're trying to survive on this island. You're not trying to have the most heart-healthy diet. So at this stage, the hot dog would be the answer. And what is heart-healthy? What can healthy eating look like? It can look like a plate of avocado, different nutrients, fish as well. It can look like a pizza. It can look like a poutine as well. It can also look like the balanced plate. Overall, healthy eating depends on many factors. So you eat because of physical reasons, because of emotional reasons as well. You can eat because of spiritual, cultural, social reasons. There are so many reasons that we eat. And this is why there's room for all kinds of foods and not to necessarily restrict or avoid certain foods. Yes, there is a balanced way of eating where you'll have more nutrients, more protein. You'll be able to maintain, for example, if you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, you're eating your protein, you're eating something that looks like the balanced plate, it will help with your health, of course. But also you have to consider the effect that restriction can have on someone, or you have to also consider all the different lifestyle factors. So for example, I mentioned that we eat because of social reasons. You don't necessarily want to cut out going to restaurants, for example, if it's part of your lifestyle or socializing. These are all aspects to consider. And the next point I'd like to get to is mindful eating. So mindfulness, to be in the present moment without judgment, and this applies to food as well. I talked about the Canadian Food Guide. I'll also talk about this mindful plate, which is not an official guideline, but I would say is as important as the Canadian Food Guide. On the far right, you can see to be aware, to savor your food, to observe, to be in the moment, to be non-judgmental. The how you eat is just as important as what you eat. So be, again, kind to yourself, even with a heart-healthy diet in order to make sure that your heart is the healthiest possible. You don't need to go too extreme. Being kind with yourself and making little changes at a time is all you would need as well. A little example of what mindful eating can look like. So for example, let's say you feel like eating chocolate. You tell yourself, no, it's not healthy. My heart is not the healthiest right now. It does not deserve chocolate. I'm going to eat an apple instead. You go for the apple. Then you say, you know what? I still want chocolate, but I'm going to eat something more with more calories. I'll have a high fiber diet or oatmeal, which is very heart healthy, and a bit of water or milk in it. You have your oatmeal, and then you realize you're still craving your chocolate. You tell yourself, I'm just going to have one bite and might as well just have all 4 chocolates. It'll be my cheat day today. So you end up having more chocolate than you initially were craving. Instead, if we're being more mindful, you can say, I feel like eating chocolate. I might as well have a little bite and then I can move on with my day. Sometimes not everything needs, we don't need to restrict on high sugar, high fat foods necessarily. They could be part of a balanced diet as well, because eating is behavioral as well. So it's not, again, not just what you eat. The behavior part plays a huge role. So sometimes when we restrict, we might crave it even more. You have to consider how much of the behavior part affects the way you eat as well. Now, I'm not saying if you want chocolate the whole day and it's all you want to eat to just have chocolate, but I'm saying reflecting on the why you're craving chocolate and how you eat, and the behavioral part of eating is just as important as what you eat. And that brings me to intuitive eating. I won't go in details in intuitive eating. It doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. So intuitive eating is more helping you understand your body, your hunger and your fullness cues. So we've been told so many different rules when it comes to eating, different diets, counting calories, which is external, diets as well as external advice, but we forget our internal bodies have the body cues to regulate our hunger and our fullness as well. Sometimes if we just listen to if we're hungry, if we're full, and being more in touch with our body can help us regulate our eating a bit better. Now, again, intuitive eating might be difficult for some people. You might say that I don't know when I'm full, I don't know when I'm hungry, I can always eat. And this is where it takes practice, and it could take other, different external advice as well. But overall, intuitive eating is meant to help you reject the external noise and focus a little bit more on how your body is feeling. There's no one right way of eating. It really depends on you, but I'm giving you the different tools in order to see how you want to approach eating. It sounds weird, but eating can be a practice if we've done it wrong all our life. If we just listen to, I should have my entire plate, I should do this or that diet, it can become more difficult to know how to eat at a certain point. So what about weight? A lot of the time, doctors might recommend weight loss for heart health. And yes, it can help you manage your blood pressure better, your cholesterol better, your blood sugars as well can be more managed if you lose the weight. The importance is how you do it, and also, is it necessary that you lose the weight? Health can be measured in multiple different ways, and weight loss might not be the main or the best way or the most healthy way for you at the moment. Again, it doesn't mean you don't, losing weight is not something you would like to work on. It's okay to focus on weight loss, but it also depends how you do it and why you're doing it. If you lose weight rapidly, chances are, studies have shown that you might regain the weight, and sometimes might regain even more than your original weight. You might be even more unhealthy later after losing and regaining the weight than you were at the beginning, because you might have restricted on certain nutrients, you might have lost a little bit of muscle loss. And if you're someone who loses weight, gains weight, loses weight and gains weight, and has that yo-yo with your weight, that also increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. So at this point, the why we're losing weight is important to reflect on, and how we're doing it is also very important. And try to see if there are other ways you can measure your health and success other than nutrition, other than weight loss. Nutrition and nutrients. Oh, and to touch up a little bit on certain weight loss medications like Ozempic. Again, these can be very helpful to lose weight, control your blood sugars. But then again, it really depends how you're losing the weight. Sometimes you might not have the appetite. You might not be eating as much. You might experience certain nutrient deficiencies. So it's very important to work with a dietitian if we're working towards that weight loss and if we're on these medications. So I'll get more into the nutrient part. So the first thing I'll touch upon are fats. And there are different types of fats. We have unsaturated fats, which are considered the good fats. So here I wrote poly and mono unsaturated fats. And you have saturated fats, which I'll talk about in a bit, which are the fats that we don't recommend. For unsaturated fats, or good fats, we recommend having fish 2 times a week, a minimal 2 times a week. Nuts and seeds for the good fats, oils as well, except for palm and coconut oil, which have a lot more saturated fat than the good fat. So overall, you want to increase your good fats, and that's usually anything liquid at room temperature. So like we talked about oils, if it's a bit solid at room temperature, like the coconut oil, it will be more on the saturated fat end. For omega-3, so omega-3 is a type of unsaturated fat that we find in fish, and it's essential, meaning we need to get it from food. There are a lot of supplements. However, studies show that it does not improve cardiovascular outcomes. We recommend taking omega-3 through fish rather than through supplements. So supplements don't really do anything. Sometimes 2 to 4 grams of omega-3 supplement might help triglyceride levels. Although there is a medication for that, if you would need to speak to your doctor about it if your levels of triglycerides are very high. Omega-3 supplements might not be recommended at this stage even. So again, go with the food instead of the supplement. Trans fats, well, they've been banned in Canada since 2018. We don't need to worry as much about them. Sometimes you'll see naturally occurring trans fats, so like 0.2 grams in dairy products, for example. These are not considered harmful, so you don't need to necessarily worry about those. Saturated fats, so these are the fats that the quote unquote, the bad fats that we recommend you limit as much as you could. They have a different molecular structure than other types of fats. They are solid at room temperature. Again, think of coconut oil, butter. They increase your LDL, so your bad cholesterol, and they're usually found in red meat and dairy. So beef, veal, pork. Red meat is any animal with 4 legs. Lard, butter, fried foods, dairy foods as well, palm kernel oil, and coconut oil. For dairy products, they do have a lot of saturated fats, but the studies show that they're not as harmful as meat products. So I would recommend that you focus on the quantity of dairy products you're having. So it's not as, again, it is very high in saturated fat depending on the fat percentage that you're getting. But if you're having it as a snack, having a few, maybe about 30 to 50 grams per day, it's not harmful to necessarily include dairy in your diet. And it could be beneficial for protein, for calcium, etc. So what about cholesterol? Cholesterol is found in animal-based products. It's found in liver, kidneys, eggs, shrimp. So in seafood, there's a lot of cholesterol. It's also found in fish, red meat, although there's a bit less than seafood and liver and kidney, etc. Do we need to completely cut out cholesterol? So here I put limit to 200 to 300 milligrams per day. These are not necessarily the main recommendation. So I would say, although cholesterol, it's funny because our blood level of cholesterols will be high, but the cholesterol that we eat doesn't have a strong correlation with our blood cholesterol for some reason. Because, well, I'll tell you the reason. The liver makes about 85% of circulating cholesterol. So the food that you eat does not have the biggest impact. So the medication that you might be taking, like a statin, basically stops your liver from making that excess cholesterol. There are different types of medications to help with cholesterol levels, but this is one that you will see often if you have heart disease and high cholesterols. Overall, limiting completely cholesterol is not the main recommendation. I would focus more on limiting saturated fats, increasing your fiber, which we'll get into. But cholesterol is still one aspect to consider if you're having a lot of seafood, if you're having a lot of eggs, etc. And speaking of eggs, we recommend about 3 to 5 eggs per week, not more. The studies always change on eggs. We don't necessarily need to cut them out. So eggs do have many benefits. They have a lot of vitamin D, B12. They're low in saturated fats and contain a lot of unsaturated fats. So they're low in the bad fats, high in the good fats, but they do contain cholesterol. So 1 egg to 2 eggs, you can easily attain that 200 to 300 milligrams per day that's recommended. Overall, again, you don't need to cut out any eggs. You can still have 3 to 5 per week is the recommendation for now, for today. These recommendations might change in a few years. Overall, cholesterol, again, would not be the main thing to limit. I would focus again on saturated fats and fiber, which right now I'll get into. Fiber helps decrease your bad cholesterol, so your LDL. It has a lot of other benefits, can lower risk of developing many cancers like colon cancer. It can help you be more full easily. It's associated with diets rich in other nutrients and vitamins and minerals. Overall, fiber is recommended for heart health. Sometimes you would need, if you don't have a heart disease, you would need about 25 to 30 grams per day. If you do have high cholesterol levels, are at risk of heart disease, or have had any, or have heart disease, doubling that amount of fiber, if possible, can be very beneficial for heart health. Maybe try to aim for 30 to 50 grams per day. Where do you find fiber? Vegetables and fruits, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and lentil, beans, chickpeas, so legumes. So any plant-based protein, and then everything else on the food guide. So overall fiber, again, there's 2 types of fiber. There's soluble and insoluble fiber. Both are great. Soluble fiber that we find, for example, in oatmeal and chia seeds, those form like a gel structure and can help decrease the levels of cholesterol even more. In the circulating blood cholesterol even more. Try to aim for foods that are high in soluble fibers. Again, oatmeal, chia seeds, barley, avocados as well. These all contain soluble fibers, which are very beneficial, but any type of fiber would help your heart health. Salt. Sodium is plays a huge role in blood pressure. The Hypertension Canada recommends about 2,000 milligrams per sodium per day, which is a little less than a teaspoon of salt. How do you calculate that? You cannot really calculate that. Salt really depends on the foods that you buy. So even if you're not salting your foods at home, but you're buying a lot of foods that have salt in them, then you're not necessarily reducing your salt intake. Most of the salt will come from processed foods, sauce, cheese, pizza, frozen meal, pre-prepared meals, salad dressings, etc. The idea with salt, I would say 3 things: cook more at home, look at the food label, and replace salt at home with spices, lemon, anything else. And doing these 3 things can help you reduce the salt as much as you can. Overall, there's no secret. I don't recommend you start calculating the milligrams of salt that you add, but it's to give you an indication that if you do add a full teaspoon in your meals, then you're already passing the recommended level from Hypertension Canada. I'll just go over the food label quickly to show you what I mean by aiming for low salt. For example, first thing you want to do, you want to look at the quantity, the portion. So looking at 1.5 tablespoon. Then you want to look at the saturated plus trans fat. So these are combined, and that percentage you find on the side is telling you, for example, you're eating 3% of the amount of saturated and trans fats you're allowed in a day. If you aim for less than 5, it's good, because the lower the percentage, the better. Then for fiber, it's telling you here that you're eating 18% of the fiber recommended in a day. So 18% is a good number. If you have, multiple teaspoons, tablespoons of those, you're already reaching the 100% fiber that's recommended in a day. Sugar, you want to try to aim the same thing as saturated and trans fats for less than 5%. Sodium, you want to aim for less than 5%. So overall, everything on the food label, you want to aim less than 5% in general, except for fiber. You want to aim for the highest possible. Because here, again, it's telling you that you're eating 18% of the recommended fiber in a day. And if I tell you, for example, someone with a heart condition would need more fiber, that 18% doesn't represent technically the amount of fiber you would need. So even the 18% would not be enough. So when I talk about fiber, I'm really talking about increasing it as much as you can tolerate. Otherwise, saturated fats, sugar, and sodium should be as minimal as possible. Here is an example. You have a pizza, 2 different pizzas, and I'll let you pause and let me know which one would be better in saturated fats, which one would be better in sugar, and which one would be better in sodium. And when I say better, which one is lower in saturated fat, sugar, and sodium. I'll let you pause the video. And if you haven't paused the video, I will be saying the answer. So the first thing you want to look at is the portion size. So here we're talking about half a pizza. Here we're talking about a full pizza. Look at the grams. It's about exactly half of it. So you would need to double the percentages technically. If we're looking at saturated fats, at first look, this one seems to have on the left a lot more, 110% of what you're allowed in a day of saturated fat, which is a lot per one pizza. This one has 13. You would need to double it, so 26%. The one on the right still remains the better option. If we're looking at the sugars, technically, the one on the right has more if you double it. So it becomes 28% versus 10. So the one on the right would be the better option. If we're looking at salt, at first glance, the one on the right seems to be lower. However, we're talking about half a pizza, you would need to double it. Technically, you're already reaching by eating a full pizza 90%. So 45 times 2, you're reaching 90% of the salt you're allowed in a day versus eating the other one, it's only 57%. Is there a better pizza than the other? Not necessarily. I would go with the one the flavor you prefer. A frozen pizza is a frozen pizza. You can't necessarily win if you're aiming for a specific brand. So in general, I would just compare, look at the portion size first. Don't be tricked when it comes to the portion size, and then compare the percentages. Now we're going to compare apples to apples. You have one normal soy sauce and one saying less sodium. When we're looking at the food labels, for 1 tablespoon of the regular soy sauce, you're eating 40% of the salt you're allowed in a day. For the other one, the less sodium, you're eating 24% of the sodium you're allowed in a day for 1 tablespoon. Now, does it mean the less sodium one is good, is low in salt? No, you can still see for 1 tablespoon, you're already having 24% of that salt. It's still quite high. So all this to say is to be mindful of the marketing in the front of the package. Always look at the food label and look at the ingredient list. Out of all 3 salts, which one would be better? So regular table salt, sea salt, Pink's Himalayan salt. I'll let you pause the video. And once again, if you haven't paused, I'll be saying the answer, and it's none of the above. They're all the same. They're all sodium chloride. The idea, again, whichever you'll put less of will be the better option. Even some might contain nutrients that others don't have, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about sodium, it's the same quantity. It goes back here to what I mentioned, the 3 things: cook more at home, use more spices, look at food labels. You can also rinse your food. So feta cheese, you can rinse it. Canned foods, pickles, rinse all of those foods to get rid of that excess salt. Careful with some of the salt substitutes, like no salt salt that contain potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. The potassium might be too high, and potassium is an electrolyte. It can really affect your heart condition. You don't want to overdo it either. So taking a potassium chloride salt is the equivalent of taking a supplement of potassium, depending how much you're adding. So try to avoid those. I would go for example, a mixture of spices that don't contain sodium would be the better option as a salt replacement. So I just mentioned to not overdo it with potassium, but when it comes to food sources that have potassium, I would like for you to have those foods, depending on your condition. Again, if you have, for example, kidney disease, you might need to be careful of the potassium intake. But I'll focus here on only heart health. We do recommend foods that have potassium, not supplements, but foods. That's found in legumes, dairy, whole grains, poultry, and meat, a variety of vegetables and fruits. Potassium can help control your blood pressure a little better, as well as magnesium. Magnesium can be found in those foods as well. Again, it goes back to having a variety of different food sources that can help control your blood pressure, the risk factors that affect heart disease, and overall your heart health. When it comes to sugar, same thing as a salt activity between all of these sugars. So you have powdered sugar, you have agave syrup, you have honey, you have maple syrup, and you have brown sugar. Which is the better option or healthiest option? So I'll be telling you the answer for this activity. So pause the video if you would like. But the answer is none of the above, all of the above. They're all the same. Sugar is sugar. Yes, maple syrup might contain more nutrients, honey as well, depending on other types of sugars, compared to other types of sugars. But at the end of the day, it's still affecting your blood sugar the same as they all affect your blood sugar the same. Your body is not differentiating these different types of sugars. So if you have, for example, if you're adding honey in your tea instead of sugar, again, it's still going to be processed as sugar. Caffeine. So we recommend not more than 300 to 400 milligrams per day, which is the amount that even someone without a heart disease can have. What does that look like? Filtered coffee is about 179 milligrams of caffeine. Make sure to look at the other sources like Coca-Cola can contain, or Coke can contain 50 grams. Green tea can contain 15 to 50 grams. So it really depends on the different sources. I would recommend, for example, 2 to 3 cups a day maximum. If we're going above that, it might be too much caffeine. And if you're prone to AFib, I would recommend to avoid coffee at all costs, because that can make it worse. So that's when the heart flutters and goes in all kinds of directions. So avoiding coffee would be your best option. Coffee can increase the blood pressure in the moment. Long term, studies haven't shown that it really affects your blood pressure in a chronic way. So what about alcohol? So you might have seen the recommendations 0 to 2 for women, 0 to 3 for men. A lot of the time we forget about the 0 and we focus on the 2 or the 3. The recommendation is really 0 for alcohol. So this is from the Canadian Addiction Substance Guidelines. So they recommend 0. So it's not 0 to 2, it's not 0 to 3, it's really 0. And sorry, it's the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction. And they demonstrate that every additional drink increases the risk of certain cancers, heart disease, stroke, etc. And really having 0 drinks is the healthiest thing you can do for yourself. And the studies are just growing and growing on alcohol. So if you're able to cut it out or limit alcohol as best as you could, that would be ideal. Even red wine, yes, some studies show that it might be heart healthy. It's still alcohol and affecting other organs. And you still have to consider it in the category of alcohol. Finally, for the last part, I'll talk about the different diets. You have the Mediterranean diet. What does the Mediterranean diet look like? To simplify it, on the bottom of the pyramid, it's everything you want to have most of, and on the top is everything you want to limit. So whole grains, fruits, beans, vegetables, you want to eat as much as you can. Then as you go meat, limit the eggs, the dairy foods, etc. And for sweets at the top of the pyramid a few times a month. The idea behind it is there's no strict quantities. It's really an overall pattern where they tell you to have fruits, vegetables, whole grains, especially for the fiber. And the foods that are higher up are higher in saturated fats and cholesterol, which are the foods you want to try to limit. This, in simple terms, is a Mediterranean diet. Adding olive oil can help. Nuts and seeds as well can be part of that diet. You don't need to necessarily change your diet completely. Again, you can see whole grains can be part of any culture. Same thing for fruits and vegetables. Another diet is the DASH diet, dietary approach to stop hypertension. That's what it stands for. And here it gives you different portions. So how many portions of fruits, vegetables that you should be having in order to, again, have the most amount of fiber, least amount of saturated fats. If you really look at the portion size, it's just going to be mostly fruits, whole grains, vegetables, and very few red meat sweets. It goes back to the pyramid a little bit. But that, if you need numbers, that could be a good diet to follow. Portfolio diet, if you like to count your grams, for example, it talks about how many grams of nuts and seeds per day, about 45 grams, that would be recommended. Plant proteins, about 50 grams. Viscous soluble fiber, so I talked about the soluble fiber found in oats, chia seeds, barley. Plant sterols, so plant sterols are you can't necessarily have 2 grams. The recommended is 2 grams daily. You cannot find that through food. You would need to eat so many, let's say so many avocados, but there are supplements for it. I don't necessarily recommend you start with it. There are good studies showing that they do reduce your cholesterol levels. What I would recommend is to start with everything else. And if, for example, you're not tolerating a statin medication like the cholesterol medication and you just need to decrease your cholesterol by a bit, you can ask your doctor or pharmacist about plant sterile medications, supplements. So overall, the final thing would be the good fats as well, to have as much as the unsaturated fats as well. So this diet goes by grams, while the other diet went by portion. Like the DASH diet was portion control, and then the Mediterranean was really an overall approach to eating. So you can really see all of them are very similar. I'll talk about the last one, which is the vegetarian/vegan pattern. That as well will help you focus more on vegetables, on fiber foods, plant-based proteins as well, which have a lot of fiber in them. You might need to consider nutrients supplementation, maybe iron, maybe B12, depending on how you're approaching this diet. A vegetarian diet doesn't necessarily mean a healthier diet. You can be vegetarian and you can follow a vegetarian diet and not have a lot of the plant-based protein, not have a lot of fruits and vegetables. The idea behind all the dietary patterns we've just seen is really a lot of fiber foods and very little saturated fats. So being on a vegetarian/vegan removes the saturated fat and removes the cholesterol from your diet automatically, especially a vegan diet, but you still have to consider the other aspects and that you're not deficient in any other nutrients. So overall, I hope the diet pattern is not overwhelming, because if I can simplify heart healthy diet in one simple sentence, it would be a lot of fiber, very little saturated fats. So a lot of legumes, fruits, vegetables, very little red meat, very little, and limiting your dairy products as well. Be mindful of sodium as well, and be mindful of the amount of sugar and carbohydrates we're having. So don't start with going 180 on all the changes. I would recommend one change at a time and make sure that it sticks. So whatever habit you're going to implement, I would recommend 2 or 3 habits to implement from now on. Make sure it's something that you're going to keep for the rest of your life, because we are going to eat for the rest of our life. So make sure it's something that's not making us miserable. You don't have to go too strict, and I'm sure there are certain things I've talked about today that you might have already known about, but have not applied them. So at the end, nutrition is behavioral. Make sure that you're able to find ways to apply those changes to yourself. All right, so that would be all for nutrition and heart health, and thank you for listening.